Welcome to the podcast. This is Mr. White,
Mr. Johnson.
and welcome to the last podcast of the year. Maybe for some of them, their first podcast.
Well, I don't know.
Hard to say.
Yeah.
And today we're going to talk about two processes. They're nuclear related. One is nuclear fusion. The other is nuclear fission, which we'll talk about as well. And if you could just summarize for us, Mr. Johnson, what is nuclear fusion?
Well, basically, fusion, when I think about the sun. How the sun takes the hydrogen atoms that it has and fuses two of them together to form helium atoms.
Okay. Is this unique just to our sun?
No, it's any star.
Right, so all stars undergo this process of fusion. So we're going to take a small atom plus a small atom, and we're going to get a bigger atom. It's pretty fundamental and basic. It's important to know that these two small atoms just won't do this on their own. It's not like two hydrogen atoms bump into each other and fuse together.
It's extreme pressure.
Right.
Extreme heat.
Okay.
Basically the center of the sun.
Right. So these conditions are only present at the center of a star. Okay? So it's like a required heat and pressure, and that the extreme term applies to both heat and pressure. Are these conditions reproducible on Earth?
I don't think so.
No, they can't be. No lab, no scientist has ever been able to figure this one out. And, of course, heat is a form of energy.
Right.
And so there's energy that you get out of it. You have to put into this, but then there's also some energy that you get out of it. And that's really important to figure out what's going on there.
Last podcast. Gotta have problems. Are we recording still?
I don't know.
We're still on. We're still going.
We're
Nice.
still on. Okay.
See?
I don't know what happened.
Computer's got to get its 2 cents in.
So we do get some energy out of this. We put some energy in. We theoretically have to get more energy out than you put in.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why we haven't been able to reproduce these conditions on Earth, because the energy input is a lot bigger than the energy output. It's not even close. And so what ends up happening is you've got hydrogen. Okay. And I'm probably oversimplifying this. In fact, I know I am. I believe you do 4 hydrogens, and there's a couple, there's some other things involved here. I can't remember everything anymore.
It's probably heat as a catalyst.
Okay.
We don't really specify pressure.
Okay. And then what do you get out? You get a helium atom. And it looks like you're going to have to get a couple protons.
Right.
Right.
And usually energy. Some form of energy.
And there's got to be some energy.
Probably usually not so much the heat, but probably light.
Actually, they can't be a proton. Man, it's been a long time. It's a positron.
Right.
And some energy. And you said it in the form of heat and or light. And so this is the process that happens at the sun. This is happening all the time. So 4 hydrogens smashed together. They're under extreme heat and pressure. The byproduct is some helium, 2 positrons, and some energy.
Mm-hmm.
The helium, the heat and temperature, the heat and pressure of the sun isn't big enough to make helium fuse yet.
Right.
What will end up happening is when the sun runs out of hydrogen, it will it'll have to get bigger, it'll have to get hotter, and it'll start fusing helium together to make some other elements.
Which will form carbon, because atomic number 4, and then you get 4 and 4 is 8, and then exponentially you just keep making
more
until
and
you
more
almost
stuff.
got like an iron core.
Right. And so the sun will get bigger and bigger. It actually gets so big that it will consume the orbit of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But don't worry, that's not for yet another 5 billion years or so.
Give or take.
I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, I think so.
An asteroid will get us long before the sun gets us.
or our own stupidity.
Yeah.
I like to tell the students that if the sun were to implode just out of the blue, you wouldn't know about it till 8 minutes.
Right.
So.
Because the speed of light is a finite thing. It's a real number.
It takes 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
And they're like, well, what about after that? I'm like, there is no after that.
You'd look up at the sky and say, what? And that'd be it.
Wait, is that?
Done. The other process, of course, is nuclear fission. And fission, this is real on Earth. I'm sure there are some natural processes, but we only ever seem to talk about bombs and power plants. And that is all operating on nuclear fission. And fission in most nuclear reactors, not all, most nuclear reactors involves a little something called uranium, atomic number 92, mass 235. This is the unstable kind.
It's the opposite of fusion, because fusion was the small atom combining to form bigger, whereas fission is the bigger breaking apart to form smaller.
So bigger breaks apart into small plus small. And then, of course, some energy.
Right.
Right. That's the goal of all of this. And what you do is you take one neutron and you slam it in to a uranium nucleus. And you're purposefully causing problems. This already isn't very stable.
No.
You jam another neutron in there, between the weak and the strong force, they hack it out, and this is what happens. The atom splits.
Right.
Okay, this is the process called fission. And what we get out of this is barium, atomic number 56. Krypton, atomic number 36. And if you start doing the math here, 144 and 89 does not equal 235.
No.
But 56 and 36 does equal 92. So what ends up happening is you're 3 mass numbers short, and those 3 mass numbers short are 3 neutrons. And what we end up forming here is what's called a chain reaction.
Those 3 neutrons go off, slam into other uranium,
Right.
and so forth and so forth.
So these 3 neutrons hit 3 more uranium atoms, all right? They split into 3 more bariums, 3 more kryptons, and 9 neutrons. And those 9 neutrons hit 9 more uranium atoms, and we get 9 more bariums, 9 kryptons, and 27 extra neutrons. And you can see how quickly this process multiplies itself.
And you got to remember, too, that when we're talking 1 uranium, in actuality, it's Avogadro's number, 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd molecules of that uranium in 1 mole. And that's a very small amount.
That's a really tiny amount of uranium.
And the uraniums that they're using rods of uranium.
Correct. Like as big as your arm.
Right.
Right?
So that's a lot.
So you start thinking about how many moles and how many atoms is that. And then you think back to the podcast from Section 8. Wow, that's a lot of energy. Okay? And these are the 2 nuclear processes that we know about, and we rely on fission heavily. And fusion, we don't rely on it at all right now. But this is a technology that will, I would think, be developed in the next 100 years or so.
Well, technically, as a practical purpose, we don't rely on it, but we need it.
We do.
As far as to survive.
Right. The sun's operating on fusion. But from a tech standpoint, the next 100 years, theoretically, we could be working on these kinds of projects.
Could you imagine a fusion engine with just hydrogen being used?
The nice thing about, what potentially could be the nice thing about fusion is it's not producing radioactive waste.
Right.
This is producing radioactive waste, which is really hard to store and deal with long term. There is no place to store it, put it long term. That's the problem.
I mean, you got a fusion engine. If you're working on it, the only thing you're going to do is sound like a munchkin.
Right. Yeah, that would be the way to go.
Now, what about cold fusion?
Cold fusion would talk about smaller plus smaller yields bigger in energy, and so the concept of cold fusion means I don't need this. And that's impossible, or this would be happening all the time. Hydrogen's constantly running into hydrogen, but we're not finding excess amounts of helium and just spontaneously creating energy out of thin air. So cold fusion does not exist, although it's a term you hear in Hollywood movies a lot, and it makes the newspaper every now and then.
It's something I think they're trying to find, because then they don't need that extreme pressure or heat, but they still get the same amount of energy.
I think it's a pipe dream.
You do?
Yeah, physics, I don't think the rules of physics are going to allow for it.
Can't always disagree.
So, that is it. That is the last podcast of your year. I hope you enjoyed the flipped classroom. For those of you that fully participated in it, we really believe strongly in what we're doing. So, signing off for the last time, this is Mr. White.
Mr. Johnson.